Okay, good day, good morning, good evening, good night to you, wherever and whenever you're watching me. This is your brother and friend Maurice, and what are we going to talk about this time around? Well, we are continuing with our video series on the modern day Antichrist delusion, and you're watching the New Cosmos videocast.
This is the New Cosmos videocast. You've never heard it like this anywhere. Welcome.
All right, so today we continue with our series of videos on the modern day Antichrist delusion. Now, the modern church's view of the Antichrist is that of a man who is the embodiment of pure evil, and that man will sometime soon, in our near future, just before the bodily return, the supposed bodily return of Jesus Christ, that man will come on the scene to take over the Christian church and rule the world. And as a result, every king, every pope, every religion, every president, every prime minister, every leader of note over the years has been earnestly designated as the Antichrist by the modern church. So the aim of this series is to extricate ourselves from the Antichrist wild goose chase. This is the second video in the series of this multi-video study. There are 3 points per video. So if you have not yet watched the first video, I highly advise you to do so because it contains very important information which you would need in this study. That first video was entitled, "What did the apostles actually teach about the Antichrist?" And I will put a link to it on the top right of the screen, or you can go to the New Cosmos Videocast channel and look in the Antichrist Delusion playlist. Now, this second video, which we are doing today, I will call The Apostle Paul and the Antichrist. And so we will look at point number 4 when I come back. Alright, so we are back and we are ready to go to our notes and look at point number 4 in this modern day Antichrist delusion part 2. And remember, we are looking at the Apostle Paul and the Antichrist. So point number 4 reads, Paul wrote that Antichrist would manifest before the day of the Lord. And our text for this point are 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-3, Romans 8, verse 38, 1 Corinthians 3, verse 22, Romans 13, verse 12, Philippians 4, verse 5, 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 2-4, Matthew 24, verses 10 and 11, 1 John 2, verses 18 and 19. Now, in the first video, we looked at what was the apostles' teaching concerning the Antichrist. We saw that the Antichrist was actually a movement within the remnant, which had recanted the foundation doctrines of the remnant. They denied that Jesus was the Christ, and they denied that Jesus was the Son of God manifest in flesh. This was an apostasy. It was a falling away from the truth. And Paul had warned the Thessalonians that this falling away would occur immediately before the coming of the day of the Lord. So we'll go to our first text, 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 1-3. And I deliberately will not read this this scripture in the King James Version. I'm going to start reading it in the English Standard Version. I'm going to read it to you in the Berean Literal Bible Version. I'm going to read it to you in the Modern Literal Version and the Concordant Literal Version, because I want to show you how deceptive the King James Version translation can be and misleading. All right, so let's go to our Bible, and we are here in the English Standard Version. It says, "Now, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, we ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or a spoken word or a letter seeming to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come." Now notice what Paul's concern is. He's concerned that apparently there was a rumor that the apostles were teaching that the day of the Lord has already come. Okay? He says, verse 3, "Let no one deceive you concerning that matter," okay, "in any way. For that day," meaning the day of the Lord, "will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction." Okay, so what Paul's point is, and I think I need to illustrate this for us. So let's go to our point of view and look at what Paul's point was. Paul was writing, generally we think he was writing around the year 55, okay? And so we have here a representation of Paul, and we have a date here around the year 55, and we say Paul was saying, look, the day of the Lord is not present. It has not come. Okay? But we have in the year 70, which was approximately 15 years later. Well, Paul did not know. Okay? He did not know the exact day, nor the hour, nor the year. But he knew that while he was saying that the day of the Lord was not present, he knew that it was near. Okay? Because that is what he and the apostles consistently were teaching. They were teaching that the day of the Lord was near. They did not give a date or a year, but they knew it was at hand. So Paul said, listen, we do not teach that the day of the Lord is present, meaning it has already come, because we know that the apostasy has to happen first. Okay? What the English Standard Version used the word there saying the rebellion. Okay? In other versions, it says the apostasy or the falling away. So Paul says, look, the apostasy or the falling away or the rebellion, meaning among the remnant, among the believers, there must be an apostasy first. Then you would have the day of the Lord. Now we know the day of the Lord happened in the year 70. It happened at the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple. So we are looking at this timeline, and you remember, in human perception, Paul was writing here in the year 55, so he could not see what's going to happen ahead of time. But he knew, based on the teaching of Christ and based on what was being revealed to him through the Holy Spirit, that there must be an apostasy first among the remnant before the day of the Lord. So he says, look, we could not possibly be teaching that the day of the Lord is already come, because we have not seen the apostasy happen yet. Good? I want you to keep that in mind, right, as we go back to the Bible. So let's look at, so I said I'm going to show it to you in several different translations. Okay, so let's look at the Berean literal Bible. Okay? So, man of lawlessness. Now, reading the same thing again. Verses 1 to 3. Now, we implore you, brothers, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, so that's the day of the Lord, for you not quickly to be shaken in mind, nor to be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as if by us, as that the day of the Lord is present. You see, he's denying that the apostles teach that the day of the Lord is present. Why is he denying it? He says, no one should deceive you in any way concerning this day of the Lord, because it is not until the apostasy shall have come first, and the man of lawlessness have been revealed, the son of destruction, right? And we're going to stay there. So Paul's point is, listen, the apostasy must happen first. So we cannot possibly be teaching that the day of the Lord has already arrived, because there must be the apostasy first. Then that is, the apostasy actually was a sign that the day of the Lord was imminent. Imminent. Okay? So remember, Paul is writing this in the year 55, thereabouts. We know that the day of the Lord came or happened 15 years later in the year 70. Okay? Now let's go to the modern literal version. That's the last one I'm going to use, because I think I would have made the point clear. Again, verse 1. Now, brethren, we ask you concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, to the end you might not quickly shaken from your mind, nor be upset yet, either by spirit or by word or by letter as from us, as that the day of the Lord is present. Do not let anyone deceive you in any way, because it will not be, meaning the day of the Lord will not happen, unless the apostasy comes first. Good, and we stay there. Okay? So that's exactly what we see in our points. Okay? So Paul is writing after the cross. The cross is in the year 31. Paul is writing in the year 55. And at that time he says, look, we know that the day of the Lord is not present because the apostasy must happen first. But when you see the apostasy, you will know that the day of the Lord is imminent. Okay? There must be the apostasy. Good? And this apostasy, by the way, is the Antichrist. Okay? Right? The apostasy is the Antichrist. So the Antichrist must manifest first before the day of the Lord. Good? Now, why am I going through all of this? Why am I going through this point over and over? Because when you go to the King James Version, right? When you go to the King James Version, you will see Paul seeming to say the complete opposite to what we just read. Okay, so let's go. Now we beseech you, brothers, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and by our gathering together to him, that you be not soon shaken in mind, nor be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us, meaning the apostles, as that the day of the Lord is at hand. Okay? So notice, all the other translations we read have Paul denying that the day of the Lord was present, had already come. The King James, however, have him denying that the day of the Lord is even close. He's saying, no, the day of the Lord is not even close. But let's go back to our points here now and see if that matches to what Paul actually said. So we have Paul here in the year 55. We have the day of the Lord happening 15 years later, and Paul knew that the day of the Lord was near. He taught it all the time. He was consistent in teaching that the day of the Lord was at hand. But yet the King James have him denying in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 2 that he even taught that. So does it make sense that Paul is saying here at his time of writing, we do not ever teach that the day of the Lord is at hand? You see what I'm saying? The King James Version committed an egregious, appalling, and horrendous error here that has caused and that is contributed to the modern day Antichrist delusion. By having Paul denying that his teaching was that the day of the Lord was at hand, the modern day church can use that verse to say, look, Paul never said that the day of the Lord was at hand. He denied it here. So which means that the day of the Lord was far away. Okay? Because if you're denying that the day of the Lord is at hand, it means you're saying, well, it's far away. But when we go to the correct versions, which translate the Greek properly, we see that Paul was actually denying teaching that the day of the Lord had come, because he knew the apostasy had to come first. Then you would have the day of the Lord. The King James, however, have Paul denying that the day of the Lord was near, which implies that Paul's teaching was that the day of the Lord was thousands of years away. When actually the day of Paul's correct teaching was that the day of the Lord was near. It was not yet present in the year 55, but it was near because it was coming in the year 70. See, 70 is near to 55, but 70 is not present compared to 55. It's 15 years away. Okay? So while it is near, it is not present. Good? So this is one of the things we have to be aware of when we are extricating ourselves from the modern day Antichrist delusion. All right? So now let's move on. So we spend enough time there. Let's look at Paul. Let's reaffirm Paul's teaching concerning the day of the Lord, and let's spend a little bit more time on the King James version, my favorite rant, as you all know. All right. Now, Paul used the word in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 2 here, which is translated by the King James. We are in the King James version here. This word that the King James version translates as at hand is the word inistemai. Good? Now I want to show us the inconsistency of the King James, because I'm going to give us two other scriptures which Paul wrote. And Paul used the same word inistemai in these two scriptures, and we'll see how the King James version translates them. Okay, Romans 8 verse 38. Okay, Romans 8 verse 38 is one scripture which Paul, Paul wrote to the Romans, so we know he's the author here. Go down to verse 38. All right. So now, he says, for I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present. That's the word inistemai. Okay? Things present. Inistemai. The same word that in 2 Thessalonians 2, they all of a sudden decided to translate as at hand. Now, at hand is not the same as present. Present means has already happened. It's here. At hand means not yet. It's soon, but has not yet. But present means already happened. Inistemai means already happened. And Paul denied that he was teaching that the day of the Lord was inistemai, present. But the King James, for some strange reason, decided to translate it to mean the opposite of what he was saying. Again, let's look at another version, another example. Because in the mouth of two or three witnesses, a thing is established. 1 Corinthians 3 verse 22. 1 Corinthians 3 verse 22. Paul again writing, he says, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things present. Inestimai. So the King James translators knew very well that the word inestimai means present, already happened, already there. Why did they choose in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 2 to render it to mean the opposite? Not present, but at hand. That's what they translate it as at hand. Now, Paul also used a word, a Greek word, meaning at hand. It was not enestimai. The word that Paul consistently used, which meant at hand, was the Greek engizo. Right? So let's look. Let's look at Paul's use of engizo. Romans 13 verse 12. Okay? Romans 13 verse 12. Let's see. Paul, he says, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. And this is the word engizo, correctly translated as at hand. But Paul did not use engizo in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 2. He used enestimai, which every other place the King James renders as present, but in 2 Thessalonians 2, all of a sudden they change it to mean at hand. But when Paul uses the word engizo, every place they translate it as at hand. Correctly. So there must be a reason. And I don't want to judge because I don't know the intents of and motives of men. But I want to guess that because the King James translators were in a narrative, were in the traditional narrative that, the day of the Lord has not even yet happened, because the King James version was translated in the 1600s. Okay? And so at that time, as with the modern church, they were in the delusion that Christ has not yet come, the Antichrist has not yet manifested, the day of the Lord has not happened. So they thought they would help out Paul. They said, no, Paul could not be possibly saying that the day of the Lord was not present. He probably meant the day of the Lord was not at hand. And so they changed it and meant to put in that. But if you are a faithful translator, just translate what the man write. What gives you the authority? I mean, I could understand you put in a word. You have a choice of words, okay? You have a choice of words you can use. But use a word that accurately conveys what the author wrote. You don't put something completely different. Okay? So let's look at our final example, Philippians 4 verse 5. Okay? I think I have made my point clear. Good? Philippians 4 verse 5. Let your moderation be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. So Paul's teaching, as the rest of all the apostles, was that the Lord was near. The day of the Lord was near. The coming of the Lord was near. But in the year 55, the day of the Lord was not yet present. It was at hand. Why did the apostles know that? Because they knew there must come an apostasy first. And the apostasy was the indicator, the sign that the day of the Lord would follow on quickly. All right? Let's look at another confirmation of that. 1 Thessalonians 5. 1 Thessalonians 5, we're talking about the Antichrist, because the apostasy that was to come before the day of the Lord was the manifestation of the Antichrist, okay? 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 2, it says, for yourselves, he writing to the same Thessalonians, he says to them, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. So he's saying the day of the Lord was coming. And it would come in their time. Okay? For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes on them as a travail on a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But you brethren of the Thessalonian church, you brethren in the remnant, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you. All right? So Paul's teaching was that the Thessalonians, if they did not remain faithful and prepared, the day of the Lord would overtake them. Therefore, it must have been at hand. The day could not possibly overtake them if it was not near, if it would not happen in their time. It had to be at hand. So once they remained prepared, once they remained focused, once they remained faithful, then the day of the Lord would not surprise them because they were looking for it. It would happen in their time, expectantly, and not as a surprise. So Paul's teaching was indeed that the day of the Lord was at hand. But 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 2, according to the King James Version, have him denying that. You see? And this is why I no longer trust the King James Version. I have to check it at every point. You see? And I was in the religious organization where I got my religious education. To them, the King James Version was the best. No, I'm not saying that there are perfect translations, because I find problems with other translations as well. But I find the King James to be the most egregious. When it makes a mistake, it makes it horribly. It turns you completely in a different direction from which the author had sought to put you. All right? So let's go back now to our the apostolic narrative concerning the Antichrist. Okay, let's go back there now that we have. I hope that I have made that point clear. The apostolic narrative was, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day, the day of the Lord, shall not come except there come a falling away first." The apostasy was to happen first. Then the day of the Lord would come. And that day of the Lord and that apostasy was not far, far, far away, thousands of years away. It was to come in the time of the Thessalonians. That's why Paul was writing to them about it. The day of the Lord was not far, far, far away. It was about to come. It was near. It was at hand. That is why Paul was writing to the Thessalonians, warning them about it. All right? So the word here used, falling away, is the Greek word apostasia, which we in the English call apostasy. But something else I want to point out here now. Again with the King James. Notice it says, except there come a falling away. Okay? So, generally they will have a falling away. But in the Greek, it does not say a falling away or an apostasy. It instead uses a definite article. It says the falling away or the apostasy. All right? So if I was to put this back in the Berean now, okay, look what it says. No one should deceive you in any way, because it is not until the apostasy, specific. Okay? Definite article, the apostasy was to come first. So Paul was speaking about a specific apostasy, which is the manifestation of the Antichrist. Then the day of the Lord, specific, which was at hand, as Paul had warned in Romans 13:12. The day is at hand. Therefore, both the specific apostasy and the day of the Lord specific were at hand. They were near to the time of the Thessalonians. All right? And so where did Paul get this teaching? He got it from Christ, from Christ's teachings. Matthew 24, verse 10 and 11. Look what Jesus warned. These were, Matthew 24 are the signs Jesus gave for what would happen leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple. At that time, at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple, the age would end. That would be the end of the age, or the consummation of that age. And that would be the coming of the Son of Man in judgment of Jerusalem, of Israel. Okay? And he says, and then shall many be offended and shall what? Betray one another. This is the apostasy. This is the falling away. He's talking about what would happen within the remnant. He says, and many false prophets shall rise and deceive many. That was what happened. The Antichrist teachings infiltrated the remnant through the false prophets, causing deception and causing, I don't know if it was many, a few, or what. I guess it would be many. Many of the remnant betrayed one another and they fell away. That was the apostasy. The apostasy was what John, as we saw in our first video, right, which was entitled, What Did the Apostles Actually Teach About the Antichrist? We saw in that video where the Apostle John had written about witnessing the falling away. So the apostasy, which Paul warned about, which he says, the apostasy must come before the day of the Lord. Well, John wrote in his epistle that he had now witnessed that very apostasy, which Paul had warned about. Okay? So in 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, we see the Apostle John testifying that Paul's warning had come to pass. He says, little children, it is the last time, or the last hour. Even as you have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now there are. It has happened. It has come to pass, whereby we know it is the last time. We know it's the last time. We know that the day of the Lord is almost upon us, because I am seeing many antichrists within the remnant. And if we go back to our point of view, it makes sense. Because Paul here in the year 55 writing says, look, the day of the Lord is not present. Why? Because the apostasy must come first. Well, John was writing somewhere in this time now, because he says, look, I am seeing the apostasy. I'm seeing the falling away among the remnant. So I know it is the last time. I know that what the next thing we're going to see is the day of the Lord. Right? That makes sense, right? That makes sense. So let's come back to our Bible now. So John said that he knew it was the last time. Where are we? Verse 18. Right? Look at verse 19. He says, they, the antichrists, those who had been infected by the antichrist doctrine, he says, they went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would not, no doubt, have continued with us. But they went out that they might be made manifest that they were not all of us. So some that went out were actually infiltrators also. They came in to infiltrate and then they went back out. But others that went out with them, Paul said all of them are antichrists, because if they once they leave, it is an indication that they are not elect. Right? So those within the remnant who had been deceived by Antichrist teachings became Antichrists, and they went out. They fell away. They apostatized from the truth. So according to John, the words of Paul written to the Thessalonians in John's time, at the time John John was writing, he was witnessing the very thing that Paul had warned about. He was observing the Antichrist movement already happening in his time. So John concluded that the manifestation of the Antichrist belief among the remnant was the sign that the end of the age had come and the day of the Lord was near. So Paul had warned the Thessalonians that the day of the Lord was not yet present at the time that he was writing. He said, look, there first needed to come the falling away. There first needed to come the apostasy. There first needed to come the manifestation of the Antichrist within the remnant. Then the day of the Lord would come. Now, John, writing several years later, confirmed that the Antichrist had already arrived in his time. Therefore, based on what Paul had warned, John knew that it was the last hour. He knew that the day of the Lord was at the door. And so we will look at point number 5 when I come back. All right, so we are ready to look at point number 5. And point number 5 says, Paul indicated Antichrist originated in the Jerusalem temple. Paul indicated Antichrist originated in the Jerusalem temple. And our texts there are 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 to 5, Matthew 27, verse 51, Matthew 26, verse 55, Matthew 23, verses 2 to 3. All right, so let's go to our Bible and we will read 2 Thessalonians 2. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3 to 5. Okay, let's go to our Bible. It says there, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day, the day of the Lord, shall not come except there come a falling away. By the way, let me just put this in the Berean because I don't need to go over what I just explained. Okay? So no one should deceive you in any way, because it is not until the apostasy, the specific apostasy, shall have come first. Okay? And the man of lawlessness shall have been revealed, the son of destruction. Okay? So let's get back to the King James, right? So, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come the, not a, the falling away first. And that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember you not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things? Good? So Paul talks here about the revealing of the man of sin, the son of perdition, okay? And that apostasy and that falling away would happen before the day of the Lord. Now, don't get it twisted. All of these things which Paul was warning the Thessalonians about were things which would happen in their time, in that generation. He was not speaking of things or events to happen thousands of years into the future. He was warning the Thessalonians about these things because they would manifest in their time. Now, Paul said at the time of the apostasy, the man of sin, the son of perdition, would be revealed. we see that Paul indicated that this man of sin, this son of perdition, presently at the time Paul was writing, occupied a position in the temple. Notice what he said. He says, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who is opposing. This is a present tense verb. Okay? Who is opposing and exalting himself. Notice the present tense in the verb. He didn't say who will oppose and who will exalt himself. He says this man of sin and this son of perdition, at the time Paul was writing, was already opposing and was already exalting himself above all that is called God, or that is worship, so that he as God was presently in Paul's time sitting in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So Paul was not again writing about something to happen thousands of years into the future. He was talking about something that was happening in his time in the temple that was at Jerusalem. So again, we need to ask the question, how come is the modern church still looking for this man of sin and this son of perdition that Paul wrote about? Even the Greek words that Paul used pinpointed whom he was referring to. Now, there are two Greek words which the King James Version renders as one single English word, temple. Okay? So, there are two Greek words, and the King James Versions render both these Greek words as temple. But there's a distinction. There's a reason why there are two different Greek words, because it refers to two aspects of the temple. The two Greek words are naos and hieron. Now, the naos was the main sanctuary building of the temple. It was the domain of the priest. No other common person could enter that building. It was the main sanctuary building, which you have the holy place and the most holy place. Good? That was the domain of the priests. Then the hieron was the temple premises, the buildings which were surrounding the sanctuary, and that was typically called the courtyard. That was where the common folk came to bring their offerings. All right? So let's look at examples of these. Matthew 27:51 for an example of the naos. Right? Matthew 27, verse 51. Matthew 27, verse 51. It says, and behold, this is speaking about the time of Christ's crucifixion. It says, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent in two from the top to the bottom. Okay? The veil of the temple was rent in two from the top to the bottom. And the word temple here is naos. And so the fact that we have a veil of the temple tells us this was the sanctuary, because the most holy place was separated from the holy place by the veil. Okay? So this veil was in the main sanctuary. This was where the priests ministered. No ordinary folk were allowed in this building. Not even Jesus was allowed to go in there. Good? Only the priests. So that was the naos. Now let's look at an example of the hieron. Matthew 26 verse 55. Matthew 26 verse 55. All right. It says, in that same hour, said Jesus to the multitudes, are you come out as a thief Are you come out as against a thief with swords and staves for to take me? This is at the arrest of Christ, where they came to arrest him. Look what Jesus said. I sat daily with you, teaching in the temple, and you laid no hold on me. Now notice this, when Jesus says the temple here, notice he's saying that all the soldiers and the common people who were there listening to him teaching them. So this was a public area, an area where soldiers could come and arrest him, and an area where people could hear him teaching. So it was a public area of the temple. So this was the courtyard area of the temple. And the word used here is the hieron. Good? So we have two Greek words, naos and hieron, which both are translated in the King James as temple, but they refer to two different aspects of the temple. The naos is the domain of the priest. No other person can go in that into the naos. Only the priest. But in the hieron, it's a public area where the people brought their offerings, where they come to hear Jesus and the other rabbis teaching, and so on. Good? Now, which word did Paul use when he talked about the man of sin and the son of perdition sitting? Because sitting, notice Jesus says, I sat daily teaching. So sitting is a position of teaching. Sitting is a position of authority. Right? So where was the man of sin seated? Was he seated in the hieron, in the public area, teaching the people, ministering there? Or was he sitting in the naos, the domain where the priest alone could minister? The word that was used by Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 4, where he says, the man of sin and the son of perdition, who at that time, at Paul's time, who was opposing and exalting himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, was sitting in the temple. The word here is the naos. This was the domain of the priest, which means that this man of sin and this son of perdition was among the priesthood of Israel. He was probably not an individual, but referred to the apostate leadership of Israel. Because they had access to the naos. Right? And the chief priest in the time of Jesus and in the time of Paul was like the king of Israel. He had that authority, he had that power. Good? And so Paul was pinpointing that the man of sin was operating from the sanctuary of the temple, the domain of the chief priest. This is where Paul said that the system, which he called the man of sin and the son of perdition, this system which was opposing God and was exalting itself above God, there was where that system was sitting in authority. Look at what Jesus said in Matthew 23, verse 2. Matthew 23, verse 2. Or could even start from verse 1. Then spoke Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Right? The religious leaders were sitting. Remember I said sitting is a position of authority. All Therefore, whatever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not you after their works. For they say, and they do not. They were hypocritical. The things what they were imposing on the people, they themselves did not do it. But they were seated. They were seated. They had the authority. And that is the same word that Paul used to describe this man of sin, the son of perdition. He was seated in the temple, in the naos. But in there, that system was exalting itself above God's Son and his new and living way. Paul's warnings had been consistent and persistent. I believe that since Paul himself had been an integral part of that system, remember, Saul previously or originally was Saul of Tarsus. Paul had converted to become one of the remnant, but before, in his previous life, if you want to put it that way, he was a zealous Pharisee. His name was Saul of Tarsus, and we remember in the book of Acts, Saul was the one who initiated the persecution against the remnant in Acts chapter 7 and Acts chapter 8. He was the one who went to the high priest in the naos to get permission, letters of permission, to persecute the remnant. Right? So you see where that Antichrist spirit originated. It originated in the naos, in the temple. And Paul was one of them, had been one of them. So he knew and he understood how they thought, and he understood how they operated. Paul indicated that he had already warned the Thessalonians on a previous occasion concerning this man of sin. Remember in verse 5 he says, "Remember you not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things?" So the Thessalonians and the remnant were well aware on the details of the identity of this group of persons whom consisted the man of sin and the son of perdition. So this Paul was not referring to an individual. He was referring to a certain group of people who he called the man of sin and the son of perdition. Paul and the apostles absolutely were not speaking of an individual who would come on the scene thousands of years later. Paul indicated that he was aware of the deviousness of the religious leaders of Israel in his time, in his day. They were the man of sin and the son of perdition. They were in a position of authority and influence in the naos, the temple of God, over Israel in Paul's time. But they were not of God, nor were they for God. In fact, they opposed God's plan for a new covenant world, and they attempted to destroy all those who were embracing Christ and the new covenant. This was the origin of Antichrist. And they were about, in Paul's time, they were about to launch the most devastating blow to the remnant by means of the insidious Antichrist doctrines. And so we will look at point number 6 when I come back. Okay, so we are ready to go to point number 6. And point number 6 says, the man of sin was the corrupt religious leaders of Israel. The man of sin was the corrupt religious leaders of Israel. And our texts there are 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 and 4, Matthew 23, verses 1 to 15, and 25 to 36. So let's get back to our Bible. And we read there, verse 3, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day, the day of the Lord, shall not come except there come the falling away first. In the Greek, there is a definite article there. The falling away, the apostasy must come first before the day of the Lord. And that man of sin be revealed. The man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who at Paul's time was opposing and exalting himself above all that is called God and that is worship, so that he as God in Paul's time was sitting in the naos, the temple, the inner sanctuary of the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And so point number 6 says that the man of sin was the corrupt religious leaders of Israel. Paul labeled this system, which was currently in authority in Jerusalem temple, as the man of sin and the son of perdition. Now in this point, I'm focusing on the man of sin. And next video, I will focus on the son of perdition. But we will look at the man of sin for this point. Now, Jesus was the first in the Bible, in the New Testament, to identify the man of sin. We recall him speaking concerning the religious leaders of Israel of his time. And so we go to Matthew 23 and look at what Christ said about the religious leaders. We read from verse 1 to 15. He said, then spoke Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so they had the authority of Moses. All therefore whatever they bid you to observe, that observe and do. But do not you after their works, for they say, and do not, they were hypocrites. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do for to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries, and enlarge the borders of their garments, and love the uppermost rooms at feasts, and the chief seats in the synagogues, and greetings in the markets, and to be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. So they loved the fame. They loved the authority and the worship that they received because of this exalted position. The religious leaders of Israel were, as it were, kings of the earth. And that's what they are labeled in the book of Revelation, the kings of the earth. All right? But be not you called Rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ, and all you are brothers. And call no man on earth, and call no man your father on the earth, for one is your Father which is in the heaven. Neither be you called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. For he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever shall exalt himself, hello, you remember what Paul said about the man of sin? He exalts himself above all that is called God. Whoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourself, neither suffer you them that are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayer. Therefore you shall receive the greater damnation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you compass the sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made, you make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. All right? So notice, Jesus did not have a favorable view of the leaders, the religious leaders of Israel. He didn't. Right? He called them hypocrites. He said they were arrogant. They loved the popularity and the worship. They did not minister to the people. Instead, they wanted to be ministered to. Good? And they were candidates for damnation in his judgment. Let's move down to verse 25. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrite, for you make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but within they are full of what? Extortion. These leaders were extorting the people. They were robbers. They were plunderers. Okay? They're full of extortion and excess. He says, you blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and the platter, that the outside of them may be clean. So Jesus was talking about their spiritual condition. Yes, if you saw these men, just like today, they put on all of these fancy clothes and, gowns, and it have all of these ornate designs and expensive robes. And when you look at these men, man, you say, wow, they look so grand and they look so important and they look so regal and royal. Right? But inside, Jesus said, they are full of extortion. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like the whitewashed sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but are within full of dead men bones and of all uncleanness. This is why Paul said, look, these people were going to be revealed. They're going to be exposed. The chief priest did not actually do anything. They just issued. They spoke the command and then it was carried out. So, in our time, we call that plausible deniability. Nobody could really trace it back to them. All the Antichrist doctrines and so on, the infiltration that they organized and orchestrated of the remnant, is only through the spiritual understanding and guidance of the apostles that they traced it back into the temple. But nobody, the common folk, were like, where are these teachings coming from? How is it that we have these people rising up? But the apostles, through the revelation of the Holy Spirit, revealed that this thing come right out from the temple. This is where it originated from. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. So these very people who were orchestrating the death of the apostles and the members of the early church, they would go to the gravesite and the sepulchres of the ancient prophets and they would have their ceremony, like in today we go to the monuments of the soldiers who died in the war and so on and so forth, and you lay their wreaths and they have a big ceremony and so on. Okay, so they had the big ceremony and they honored the prophets. But Jesus said, listen, those same prophets, if they were alive in your day, you would kill them. So don't think you're fooling me when you honoring the prophets who are dead, because you are the same people who are going to kill my prophets. Look what he says. You be witnesses of yourselves, that you are the children of them which killed the prophets. Fill you up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you generations of vipers. How can you escape the damnation of hell? For behold, I send to you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them you shall kill. Some of them you shall crucify. Some of them you shall whip in your synagogues, and some of them you shall persecute from city to city. So when you going and have your big ceremony at the tombs of the prophets of old, and you lay your wreaths and you honor them, you are hypocrites, because you are the same people who are going to kill the apostles. You are the same people who are going to persecute the righteous. And Jesus says, because of that, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth. From the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things shall come on this generation, the generation to whom Christ was speaking to. All right? So, the man of sin was Israel's corrupt religious leaders. They had abused their authority. They had profited from the people by extortion. And the way of Christ was threatening that golden goose that they had. They would do everything in their power to exterminate the apostles. Well, they succeeded in killing Christ. And then they would go on to try to exterminate the apostles, to wipe out the followers of Christ and the doctrine of Christ. They were the origin of the Antichrist. And so we have come to the end of the second video in the series concerning the modern day Antichrist delusion. This video is entitled Paul and the Antichrist. If you appreciate this content, please like and subscribe. If you believe that this information needs to be heard in all the world, then share. You may support this ministry by purchasing one or both of my books, or purchasing from the merchandise store. The links to purchase are in the description of this video. So until next time, I'm your friend Maurice saying may God richly bless you.
This has been the New Cosmos Videocast. Remember to comment, like, subscribe, and share.